German officer disappeared without a trace. 79 years later, his secret bunker was found beneath a rural church. Bavaria. May 1945. The Third Reich is dying, choking on its own blood and broken promises. Allied bombs have torn open the skies above what was once the proudest empire in Europe. Soviet tanks crush everything in their path from the east. American forces push relentlessly from the west. The air tastes of ash, defeat, and the bitter realization that the thousand-year Reich lasted barely a decade. Hitler is dead. A bullet to the head in a concrete bunker. The cowards escape from the hell he created. And in the chaos that follows, the rats flee the sinking ship. Some surrender with hands raised. Others swallow cyanide pills, choosing poison over justice. And then there are those who simply vanish. Ghosts slipping between the cracks of a broken world. Among them, Major Werner Eckhardt. Not a household name. Not one of the monsters whose faces would hang in museums of atrocity. But something more insidious, a shadow architect, a man who built secrets into concrete and steel. Intelligence officer. Engineering specialist. Designer of underground command centers. A man who understood that sometimes the best fortress isn't the one that stands defiant against the sky. It's the one no one knows exists at all. Cold blue eyes that never blinked. Hands that never trembled when drawing precision measurements. A mind that calculated escape routes before the battle even began. That was Eckhardt. Educated at Munich's finest technical university. Recruited personally by the SS in 1936. A man who spoke little but saw everything. A devout Lutheran who attended church every Sunday, even as he helped build the machinery of genocide. His personnel file describes him with clinical detachment, exceptional spatial reasoning. Innovative structural solutions. Unwavering loyalty. What it doesn't say, he was a ghost before he disappeared. A man who moved through rooms without disturbing the air. Who kept no photographs, wrote no personal letters, left no fingerprints even on the projects that bore his invisible signature. Perfect for a man who specialized in making things, people, places, evidence, disappear. April 17, 1945. Berlin is a funeral pyre. The Soviets are less than 30 miles from the city center. Inside a half-destroyed government building, Major Eckhardt is last seen receiving sealed orders. A witness later recalled, he burned everything on his desk. Every paper, every map. Then he walked out carrying only a leather satchel and his sidearm. Surveillance records note his departure in a nondescript Kübelwagen, accompanied by two men in civilian clothes. The vehicle headed south. 2 days later, a checkpoint near Nuremberg reports a staff car with matching plates. Inside, 3 men with diplomatic credentials from the church ministry. The senior officer's papers identify him as Karl Brenner, ecclesiastical liaison. His face, partially obscured by a hat, is never properly examined. The car is waved through. It is the last official sighting of anyone matching Eckhardt's description. That same evening, a coded transmission is sent from a mobile radio unit somewhere in rural Bavaria. When deciphered years later, it contained just 5 words. Foundations laid. The shepherd waits. No recipient is identified. No further messages are sent. The voice on the radio falls silent. The Americans arrive a week later. They find nothing but abandoned roadblocks and white flags hanging from farmhouse windows. Major Werner Eckhardt is now officially a ghost, one of thousands of Nazi officials who slipped through the dragnet in those chaotic final days. His name appears on Allied watch lists throughout 1946. Possible sightings in Switzerland. Rumors of a passage to Argentina. A British intelligence report suggests he died in a transport accident near the Austrian border. By 1950, the case is cold. The file is stamped, presumed dead, and buried in the growing mountain of war crime investigations. Other monsters take priority, Mengele, Eichmann, Barbie, men whose crimes demand justice more urgently than a mid-level infrastructure officer with no known direct links to atrocities. Eckhardt becomes a footnote, then less than that. Just another Nazi swallowed by history's merciful amnesia. But the villagers of Kleinkirchheim remember something different. They remember the summer of 1945, when the old medieval church of St. Margareta received an unexpected visitor. Father Anton Gruber, newly appointed from the diocese in Munich, arrived to serve the parish with curious timing, just days after American forces secured the region. Elderly farmers recalled him as a stern man, tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and precise German that seemed too formal for a rural priest. The renovations began almost immediately. Father Gruber cited water damage to the foundation, structural concerns about the ancient stone walls. No one questioned him. The church had authority, especially in deeply Catholic Bavaria. For nearly 6 months, laborers from outside the village came and went. Trucks arrived at night carrying materials covered with canvas. The church doors remained locked except during Sunday services. When it reopened fully in December 1945, St. Margareta looked much the same. The centuries-old stone walls stood as they had since 1423. The wooden pews gleamed with fresh polish. The altar remained positioned traditionally, though now it stood on a new marble platform, slightly elevated from before. Only the floor had visibly changed, fresh flagstones replaced the worn medieval pavers, laid in a pattern that subtly directed foot traffic away from the area behind the altar. And there were other changes, too subtle for most to notice. The confession booth, relocated and rebuilt with walls twice as thick as before. The cellar entrance, now hidden behind a heavy oak cabinet in the sacristy. New metal conduits for electrical improvements that seemed excessive for such a simple church. And the bells, the ancient church bells were rehoused, their ringing mechanism modernized with precision engineering that seemed remarkably sophisticated for a village parish. Over the years, the locals began to whisper. Children playing in the churchyard claimed they heard voices beneath the ground. A grave digger swore he struck metal, not stone, when preparing a burial plot too close to the church's eastern wall. During the spring thaws, steam would rise from certain areas of the churchyard, as if something warm breathed beneath the frozen soil. Father Gruber remained for nearly 30 years, aging into a village fixture. Respected, but never beloved. He kept to himself, declined invitations to festivals, spent hours alone in the church at odd times of night. No visitors, no friends, just his devotion and his books. When he died in 1976, his replacement found the church records meticulously maintained but oddly incomplete. Certain renovation details missing. Building plans absent. Financial records vague about specific expenditures from 1945 through 1948. The new priest noticed other peculiarities: a power bill far too high for a simple church, unexplained locked cabinets in the bell tower, and strange acoustics in the sanctuary where certain sounds seemed to disappear into the walls. But he asked no questions. The Cold War taught discretion, especially in a village so close to the Iron Curtain. In 1962, an amateur historian named Klaus Weber became fascinated with Nazi escape networks. His research led him to Kleinkirchheim, following fragmentary records of Eckhardt's last movements. When he began asking questions about unusual construction at the church, he found doors closed and tongues suddenly silent. 3 days into his investigation, his hotel room was ransacked, research notes stolen. The local police suggested he had been targeted by common thieves and recommended he return to Munich. He did. 10 years later, an architectural survey of medieval churches flagged St. Margareta for anomalous modern reinforcement inconsistent with historical preservation standards. The report noted unusual concrete buttressing within the ancient stone walls, evidence of excavation beneath the nave, and power consumption patterns more typical of a much larger building. The findings were filed away, deemed irrelevant amid more pressing Cold War concerns. In 1983, a wire service ran a small story about a retired American intelligence officer who claimed several high-ranking Nazis had been hidden within religious infrastructure across Bavaria. The story disappeared from subsequent editions. The officer died of a heart attack 3 weeks later. No autopsy was performed. The Church of St. Margarita continued its quiet vigil over the village. Seasons passed. Generations grew up and grew old beneath its spire. The secret it kept remained buried, a dark heart beating beneath sacred ground. Until the earth itself betrayed it. January 15, 2024. The worst winter storms in decades batter southern Germany. Heavy rains followed by record low temperatures. The ground beneath Kleinkirchen Church heaves and shifts as water freezes in ancient foundations. Shortly after midnight, as wind howls through the valley, a sexton making his rounds hears a sound like thunder beneath his feet. The floor behind the altar has cracked open, stones thrust upward by some force below. By dawn, water is seeping into the church. Emergency crews arrive to prevent damage to the historical structure. What begins as a simple repair quickly becomes something else entirely. Workers removing damaged flagstones discover not soil or ancient foundations beneath, but a smooth concrete surface. Perfectly level. Machine finished. Modern. Parish officials contact the diocese for records of previous renovations. Nothing in the archives explains concrete beneath a medieval church. Structural engineers are called in. Ground-penetrating radar reveals what should not exist, a void extending nearly 40 feet beneath the altar. Not a crypt. Not a burial chamber. Something larger, geometrically precise, with walls of reinforced concrete. The Bavarian Historical Society takes over. Professional archaeologists arrive. What they discover defies explanation, a concealed hatch, ingeniously disguised within the altar platform. Hydraulic hinges. Mechanical locks with redundant systems. When they finally break the seal, stale air rushes upward from a spiral staircase descending into darkness. The excavation proceeds under strict security. No press, no public announcements. Just experts working in stunned silence as they uncover what can only be described as a military-grade bunker beneath one of Bavaria's oldest churches. The construction is unmistakable, the same reinforced concrete techniques used in Hitler's Wolf's Lair, the same ventilation systems found in Berlin's Führerbunker. But this was no hasty wartime shelter. This was something built to last decades, not days. 3 chambers connected by narrow corridors. Walls lined with lead and copper mesh, protection against radiation and electronic surveillance. A sophisticated air filtration system that could still function manually even now. Water storage tanks. Backup generators. Waste disposal facilities that connected to the village sewer line through disguised pipes. The first chamber appears to be a monitoring station. Radio equipment occupies an entire wall, not just standard receivers but direction-finding gear, frequency analyzers, and encryption devices decades ahead of their time. The equipment is German-made but modified, improved with components that didn't exist in 1945. Some bear manufacturing dates from the 1960s, others from the early 1970s. All meticulously maintained, as if they might be needed at a moment's notice. Maps cover another wall. Not just of Bavaria or Germany, but detailed topographical surveys of all of Central Europe. Red pins mark locations across the continent, other churches, monasteries, isolated rural buildings. Strings connect them in a web-like pattern. Notations in precise handwriting record frequencies, schedules, code phrases. The second chamber is a living space. Spartan but carefully designed for long-term habitation. A narrow bed, still made with military precision. A desk with writing materials. A small library of books, technical manuals, religious texts, political analyses spanning from 1945 to 1976. Medical supplies. Preserved food stores. Everything a man would need to survive in isolation for years, even decades. But it's the third chamber that silences even the most hardened investigators. A perfect replica of a church office, desk, filing cabinets, ecclesiastical references. The walls are lined with surveillance photographs spanning 3 decades. American military personnel. Soviet intelligence officers. Local government officials. Each face captured through what must have been carefully disguised cameras in the church above. And there, centered on the desk, a leather-bound journal. The first page bears a name and rank. Major Werner Eckhardt, Abwehr Intelligence, Special Infrastructure Division. The entries begin May 2, 1945 and continue, with decreasing frequency, until November 17, 1976. The final entry reads simply, 31 years of watching. The shepherd can rest now. Others will continue the vigil. The foundation remains solid. The Reich sleeps but does not die. Forensic teams find fingerprints throughout the bunker, all from the same individual. Dental records recovered from a small bathroom match fragmentary records from Eckhardt's military file. A DNA comparison with items from the living quarters confirms it beyond doubt. Major Werner Eckhardt didn't flee to South America. He didn't die in the war's chaotic end. He sealed himself beneath a rural church and continued his mission for 3 decades after the Third Reich crumbled to dust. The journal reveals the monstrous truth. Operation Kirchenwacht, Church Watch, was no desperate final gambit. It was a carefully orchestrated contingency plan years in the making. As early as 1943, when the tide of war turned against Germany, Eckhardt and a select team had begun identifying religious sites across Europe that could serve as perfect cover for long-term surveillance posts. Churches were ideal, respected, rarely demolished, seldom subjected to thorough searches. Their thick stone walls could hide modern infrastructure. Their established presence in communities raised no suspicion. Their sacred status provided protection against casual investigation. Eckhardt personally designed 15 such installations across Germany, Austria, and parts of Switzerland. The network was intended to survive the Reich's fall, to monitor Allied occupation, to gather intelligence for, what? The journal is explicit on this point. We are the eyes and ears of the sleeping Reich. We watch, we listen, we record. We maintain the network until the conditions are right for resurgence. Decades may pass. We accept this. The 1,000-year Reich cannot be destroyed, only forced into hibernation. Eckhardt's entries describe how he falsified his own death, assumed the identity of Father Anton Gruber using papers prepared by Abwehr document specialists. How he supervised the bunker's construction in the chaos of early occupation, hiding its true purpose behind legitimate church renovations. How he established secure communication channels with other church watch operatives using the church bell system as a disguised antenna. For years, he transmitted intelligence on American troop movements, political developments, technological advancements. His reports went to recipients he identifies only by code names: Eagle's Nest, Southern Cross, and Dian Base. Locations almost certainly in South America, where higher-ranking officers had fled to rebuild and plan. The journal grows increasingly bitter as the years pass. Replies become infrequent after 1955. By the 1960s, his messages often go unanswered. The promised resurgence never materializes. His health deteriorates. His isolation deepens. Yet he maintains his post with fanatic discipline, even as his faith in the mission visibly wanes. The final pages reveal a man consumed by doubt yet unable to abandon his oath. I have given my life to a ghost, he writes in 1975. I watch a world that has moved on without us. Yet I cannot stop watching. I cannot step into the light. I am already dead. I died in 1945 with the Reich. This is merely my afterlife. Evidence suggests Eckhardt died of natural causes, likely heart failure, while sitting at his monitoring station in November 1976. His body was removed by unknown persons who sealed the bunker but left everything else intact, as if preserving a museum to fanatical obedience. The identity of Father Anton Gruber was assumed by another priest who maintained the church for several more years before a legitimate replacement was appointed. The implications stagger the imagination. Eckhardt wasn't alone. The maps, the communications logs, the surveillance network, all point to a web of similar installations across Europe. Men like him, sealed in self-imposed tombs beneath houses of God, watching and waiting for a resurrection that never came. The villagers of Kleinkirchheim remember now what comfort had allowed them to forget. An elderly woman recalls how her father, a carpenter who worked on the church renovations, would wake screaming from nightmares he refused to describe. How he insisted certain parts of the building were not right, but would say no more. How he never set foot in the church again, even for his own daughter's wedding. A retired postman remembers delivering unusual packages to Father Gruber throughout the 1950s and 60s, heavy parcels with Swiss postmarks but no return address. Electronic components, specialized tools, books in code. Always accepted with a curt nod and never acknowledged afterward. The former village mayor, now in his 90s, finally admits what he had denied for decades, that American intelligence officers had questioned him about the church in 1953, showing photographs of Eckhardt and asking if the priest resembled this man. He had lied then, claiming to see no similarity. Why? Because he was our priest, he says simply. And we did not ask questions about the war. None of us had clean hands. Most disturbing are the records of church attendance. For 30 years, villagers confessed their sins to a Nazi intelligence officer hiding in plain sight. Children were baptized by his hands. Couples were married under his false blessing. The dead were buried with his counterfeit prayers. An entire generation received sacraments from a man who served not God but the grotesque ambition of a fallen Reich. The historical implications radiate outward like cracks in sacred glass. How many other Eckhardts remained hidden in plain sight? How many other villages harbored secrets beneath steeples and spires? The German government forms a special historical commission. Church authorities promise full cooperation while privately scrambling to inspect remote parishes and rural monasteries. Records are pulled from dusty archives. Architectural anomalies suddenly merit fresh scrutiny. Elderly villagers across Bavaria find historians and intelligence analysts at their doors, asking carefully worded questions about long-dead parish priests and unusual church renovations. Patterns emerge. A monastery near the Czech border where power consumption quadrupled after 1945 though the monk population declined. A small Luther church in Saxony rebuilt with unusually thick walls after fire damage in late 1945. A village parish in the Black Forest where 3 successive priests maintained the same Spartan habits, the same strict schedules, though they supposedly came from different seminaries. Historian Wilhelm Krauss of Berlin's Humboldt University doesn't mince words. We've uncovered the most successful infiltration in modern history. These weren't just Nazi fugitives hiding from justice. This was an organized network of observers positioned in the institutions we trusted most, watching us, recording our movements, reporting to someone. And we never suspected a thing. The questions multiply faster than answers. If Church Watch operatives were still reporting as late as the 1970s, who was receiving their intelligence? How many other Eckhardt-designed bunkers remain undiscovered? Were any still active beyond the Cold War? Did legitimate church authorities knowingly harbor these imposters, or were they too deceived? Most disturbing is the question no one wants to ask aloud. Was Kleinkirchheim exposed by accident, or by design? Was the bunker meant to be discovered now, at this moment in history, when extremism rises again across Europe? Is this revelation meant as warning or inspiration? The bunker itself has been sealed once more, this time by government order. The contents removed to secure facilities for analysis. The church remains closed indefinitely, its foundations now suspect in more ways than one. But the secret has already escaped. You cannot rebottle poison once it's been released. In the village square, tourists now snap photographs of the medieval church with its innocent stone walls and ancient spire. They peer at the stained glass windows and wonder what dark purpose lurked beneath their colored light. They try to imagine a Nazi officer disguised as a man of God, listening, watching, waiting for a resurrection that never came. Some see the bunker as proof of Nazism's ultimate defeat, a pathetic last gasp, a dead man entombed with his obsolete beliefs. Others recognize something more disturbing, the patience of evil, its willingness to play the long game, to burrow into society's most sacred spaces and wait for its moment to re-emerge. The church bells no longer ring in Kleinkirchheim. The mechanisms have been dismantled, examined for hidden transmitters and disguised antenna arrays. The sounds that called villagers to worship for centuries now exist only in memory. The silence hangs heavy over the valley, as if the very air waits for absolution that cannot come. Walk through the empty sanctuary today and you feel it, the weight of the deception, the violation of sacred trust. The altar has been removed, the flooring torn away to expose the hatch that led to Eckhardt's underground realm. Yellow police tape marks the perimeter. Scientists in white coats take samples, measurements, photographs. They speak in whispers, as if even now they might disturb something better left undisturbed. But the true disturbance isn't physical. It's the realization that history never truly ends. It merely goes underground, waiting for the right moment to resurface. For 79 years, Major Werner Eckhardt watched from the shadows. Now we are forced to look back into that darkness and recognize what it says about us, about the compromises we make, the questions we choose not to ask, the evil we allow to hide behind sacred symbols. The roots of the Third Reich ran deeper than anyone imagined, burrowing beneath the very institutions meant to represent mercy and salvation. How many other secrets remain buried? How many other churches stand watch over hidden chambers? How many other villages harbor ghosts they refuse to name? Eckhardt is gone, his bones now resting in an unmarked government facility, studied like artifacts from some ancient civilization. But his legacy lives on in the questions we cannot answer and the trust we can never fully restore. Because now, when we enter a church with ancient walls and a history that spans centuries, a small voice whispers, "What lies beneath? Who might be listening? Which sacred spaces were corrupted from within?" The shepherd has gone to his final rest. But the flock remains uneasy, looking over their shoulders, wondering what other wolves might still be hiding among them, wearing the clothing of lambs, waiting for their moment to bare their teeth once more.